Hello. Hey, welcome to History Chats this afternoon. Yeah, we're going to get started in just a bit. We're going to talk a little bit about Knowlton today, which is an interesting little community. Hopefully, yeah, a lot of cool stuff to talk about with Knowlton. It's part of our continuing series on some of the unincorporated places in Marathon County. So yeah, sorry, I'm just checking here, make sure everything is working all right. Great, looks like it is. Yeah, so we're going to be doing yeah, a little talk about Knowlton today. Like I said, part of the continuing series that we've been looking at. Speaking of stuff that we're going to be doing, we're going to jump into a new program topic next week actually, since this is the last one for the month. And we'll talk about that towards the end. I think I'll end with a little bit of a discussion about that. Not discussion. I'll let you know what we're doing. But I wanted to also just take the moment while we're kind of hanging out here for a couple minutes, waiting for people to join, and for 12:30, just to let you know, we have another History Speaks event coming up. This is our larger sort of guests who have come in and talk about things that they're experts in and their expertise. And so we're going to have Michael Gock, who wrote a wonderful book called Powder, People, and Place, and he's going to be doing a little bit of program here on the history of the Badger Army ammunition plant, which is an interesting story that I think, yeah, well, I'll probably enjoy. So that's coming up at the end of August, coming up next month. So just wanted to let you know that's a thing that we're doing. I'll probably mention it as we keep going, but it should be a good program. And yeah. Okay, just gonna make sure everything is working again. Cool. So I think I'm gonna just jump into it. There's a little bit of a delays. Yep. All right, cool. When we go, just go here. So talking about Knowlton. Oh, wait, hold on. Hey, you can see me. So we're talking about Knowlton this afternoon. Like I said, as part of our continuing series on unincorporated places, Knowlton is actually, you know, if you're just stumbled across this one because you're interested in Knowlton, we've been doing this series about unincorporated places that are a community. There's a community here, but it's not necessarily big enough to be incorporated as a village or a city, but it's not, you know, just nothing. So there is a little bit of a community here, and there's a long history. This is going to be a little different than the ones that we've been doing up to this point that Gary talked about, Bevent and Halder and Ponatuski, in that, in many ways, Knowlton has one of the oldest histories. I mean, one of the first communities to be established here in Marathon County in the early years. So yeah, let's jump into that history. Well, I'm going to start with a series of postcards, and these were taken in 1909 by James Colby showing Knowlton. So it's kind of a little small community, right? It's got dirt roads, and it's kind of spread out here. There's some buildings. In addition to, I think he actually says 1909 in the corner of a lot of these. He doesn't always label his postcards that way. This is railroad crossing here. And yeah, there's a post office, which got moved over and to be closer to the depot. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then here is schoolhouse. And I wanted to do this because, start with this series because of the person depicted here. You can kind of see there's a school teacher. And her name is May Perkins Gunther. And in addition to being the school teacher here, she was an important figure in that, she was an artist, she was a poet, and a good writer. And so she would often, she and her daughter continues that into the 20th century of Kathleen Gunther. The two of them are sort of the local source of news, in the Daily Herald or the Wausau Pilot, or down in Stevens Point, the papers, they would all, publish the correspondence of what was happening up in Knowlton or down in Knowlton. And so she provided that. And this is interesting because she talks about this series of postcards that we are looking at here. In particular, she talks about this building. So I'm going to read the, oh, here we go. So I've got the printout here. She says that the views taken about Knowlton by the artist J.M. Colby at Wausau, or of Wausau, then transferred onto postcards, are certainly very choice. The work within itself is of fine order. The different scenes of the famous Wisconsin River are picturesque indeed, ranking without doubt among the finest. The Old Tavern, which is here, the Old Tavern being in the number, built in 1849 by Mr. Loomis. As seen on the card, it appears in a state of fine preservation. This is an ideal spot, having been built on one of the high banks of the grand old river, where so many gleams of beauty can be found from its source down and throughout its whole course. She then goes on and talks a little bit more about the history of the community and how this takes importance. We'll maybe come back to this, but I first let's talk about the house, because the house is really interesting, and for many reasons, this is kind of the main reason that many people know of Knowlton. It's kind of one of the reasons that it comes to prominence, and there's an interesting story there. So as in the article here, Mrs. Gunther, she talks about how this was built by Kelvin A. Loomis, who usually said about 1849. I don't know if he actually built it, but he certainly owns it. For a while, and one of the things when you look into the history of this building is that there's a lot of names that get attached to it. Right, and at some points it's called Loomis Stand because Loomis owned it, but also during this period it's very frequently referred to and advertised as the Twin Islands House, and that's interesting because it has to do with the geography. If you look at Knowlton from this period, you have these two islands, right, and there's the hotel right on the banks, like she said, and yeah. This is a quote from 1926, an article or something like, I think that's what it was from. But yeah, they're densely wooded islands that divide the river directly behind the hotel, the old hotel. The Twin Islands were well known to lumbermen who were running the river and served as an advertisement for the hotel in the early days. And this is what's kind of interesting. So back in the 1840s when this was built, and even in the 50s, there's not a great road coming up to Wausau or Mosinee or Knowlton, right? So the main way that people are traveling is by the river, rafting logs and rafts of lumber, piloting them down the river, or coming up in canoes. That's how we got stuff in and out of the community. And so, Loomis might have owned the place, and it therefore was named Loomis Stand, but also because of the geographic point, kind of like how, for a long time people knew of Mosinee as Little Bull Falls. Even after they chose the name Mosinee in I think 54, I think is when they got the post office, 55, somewhere in there. Like into the 1850s, they're still talking about Little Bull Falls because the Little Bull Falls is the place around which the community arises. Big Bull Falls up in Wausau, and there's a lot of examples of this. And so in some ways, this could have been the way that this played out. The Twin Islands, the two islands here, gave an identity to the place. But then comes Jacob X. Brands. I've seen some different explanations. He was a tavern keeper. He got into a bunch of different venues. He had some taverns and houses in different places across the pioneering days of Wisconsin and the central Wisconsin area. Apparently, I've also seen something that said that he was maybe like a former circus clown, which seems kind of strange to say, but I don't know, maybe. I will say this picture is him when he's back in Wausau in his later years as the Justice of the Peace. So he has got an interesting arc. But he buys the Loomis Stand or the Twin Island House, whatever you want to call it, in 1856. And he is going to be responsible for giving this community its name because, see, he was born in a community called Knowlton, New Jersey. It's a township in New Jersey. And so he decides to name the house, Knowlton House, in part as a way of recognizing that. And again, as the road gets developed, and we'll talk about that in just a second, it gets a new identity. We're not talking about this in terms of the river anymore. Now it's the road that's the focus as this comes to prominence. And so the community then is less known as, I mean, if anybody knew it at anything, it was probably, Twin Island, but now there's Knowlton. So that's where the name comes from. He's only going to own it for about 2 years. So honestly, his biggest contribution was largely the naming of this, but certainly these are two important years in the late 1850s. A handful of other people are going to own and operate this. Fletcher and Babcock buy it from Brands, and then they're going to sell it to, I guess, Melinda Lawrence. I've also seen Asa Lawrence as the owner, so I didn't look into the genealogy there to figure out the relationship, but in 1862, it gets bought by Leonard Gunther, and we'll pick up on that story in a bit. But let's talk about the reason for this coming to being. This is a railroad map of Wisconsin in 1854, and if we zoom in on the area, so Portage County, I like to include this if you've never seen a map from this era. Portage County gets separated into Marathon and Portage in 1850, and we go all the way to the border with Michigan. It's not till the 1870s that Lincoln County and Taylor County and points north get separated out. But anyway, if we zoom in, the other thing that's interesting about this map is there's two Wausas for some reason, and I don't know what the situation is, but you can see there's a Wausa down here near Stevens Point. Bet you didn't know there was a Wausa down in Portage County, duh. I think in other maps I've seen there was maybe a community there that didn't really exist very much longer, called Warsaw, like the city in Poland. So I don't know what the deal there is, but we are up here, right? Now, something you will note is there's no road going to Wausau or Mosinee, again, Little Bull Falls, even though I think 54 is about the time they changed the name. There's no road. But there really was a road. It just wasn't a particularly developed road. So from Stevens Point and Plover, I guess it's kind of worth just to mentioning here that Mosinee and Wausau start to everything that you had in those communities, all the food, all the tools, your clothing, everything that you would bring up here that you couldn't make yourself, and that's most things, would have to go through Portage County. It would have to go through Plover, and then Stevens Point kind of supplants that as the main hub, because they're connected to the roads, right? There's no roads coming in through Shawano County or from the west over here or down. It all comes up the Wisconsin River. And this is great. In the 1840s, that road, which really wasn't a road, right? It was like a dirt path that animals had crafted, that Native Americans over the years had expanded, and then the lumbermen come, and it's not big enough to get a cart through very safely. It wasn't passable part of the year. A number of people are brought in. I think there's 2 surveys in the 1840s that people like John Baptiste Dubé, an early settler in this area, he gets brought on to survey a new road and see what needs to be improved. And in both cases, according to Malcolm Rosholt at least, they came back and said, no, it's fine. We don't need to make any improvements. I don't know. I haven't verified that, but I will say that would be something that the people up here in Marathon County would disagree with, because when we get our new county in 1850, one of the first things we do is say, hey, we need to look into a better road. And in 1854, we get the approval to create basically a vote for the county. Not the best turnout. It was 77-2. There were 79 people that voted in the entire county. So a little under the radar, but 77 in favor, 2 not opposed to build a road. And so they I think there's like $10,000 that they raised through bonds and other means. That's back in the 1850s to build a better road. They expand the road, to put down planks to keep stuff out of the mud. And there's some speculation that perhaps Stevens Point and people in Plover were supposed to build the road up so that the county line becomes the separator. I've seen some, certainly Wausau-centric sources, Marathon County-centric sources are a little frustrated that Stevens Point and the folks down in Plover and Point don't really get in on this because it's expensive and, it's not really their problem. But it's a real need, right? There was a point in 1852, I think, somewhere around there, where the mill at Schofield, the Eau Claire River there, they ran out of food. And so they desperately sent word down, hey, we need we need a shipment of food. And the person that came up took I think like like 4.5 days to get up from Stevens Point to Schofield. That's a lot. So we need a more efficient way. And even if Portage County doesn't rush to build a better plank road up to the county, the Marathon County venture going down, and I should say this is just me kind of roughly drawing a line. This is not actually necessarily where it went. But even getting from Wausau through Mosinee down to the county line, that better road cut the travel time almost in half. It was now a 2-day venture. But you would still probably, unless you really got up early and then you drove late into the night, you probably weren't going to make it to Wausau from Stevens Point or vice versa. So this leads to the famous house in Knowlton. There it is on the river there. Yep. It was a halfway stop between Stevens Point and Wausau and was noted for its hospitality, and good table. Drinks, dinners, and fresh horses were its offerings. Beds were available, for the old house had 13 rooms. In the 6-hour stage ride, that's to Knowlton, that's not the full ride. The 6-hour stage ride was usually a day trip. Maybe I'm wrong there. Anyway, for all-night guests, supper, breakfast, and a bed were put up for $1. And again, this is from the 1926 article that I talked about before. So this gives you an idea of the importance of this. This isn't just a hotel. This is a house. It's got a tavern where all the lumbermen that are going through would stop and, do that, but also people traveling. And that becomes the main impetus for this community's thriving. And it does thrive during this period because of this. They had agreements with the Forest House in Wausau and let me check my notes, the Curran House in Stevens Point. For the horses, so they would kind of interchangeably, you could switch out the horses if you left from the Curran House or Forest House, and so there was this system that was established to get people up and down the road. And there's the road. This is a map from 1901, so it's probably not completely accurate, but that's roughly where it travels. So it goes right past the hotel, and the community emerges there. Right. Again, this is 1901, but you got a hall. You got the post office and store. There's a church. There's a school. And there's going to be even more that comes in a bit. And for this one, you talk about Leonard Gunther. I don't have a photograph of him, but he is one of the early pioneers. He's not the first to come here. It's worth noting that the Stark family had showed up in the late 40s, early 50s. Leonard Gunther and his family show up in 1853. They come up, I think, from someplace point south in Wisconsin. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They're German immigrants, and they find a home in this area. Leonard Gunther is going to end up marrying into the Stark family, and get involved there. But he, as I said, is going to buy that house, that famous house, and do well, because that timing works out very well. In the 1860s and early 70s, there's a lot of travel back and forth between Stevens Point and Wausau and Mosinee, and so this is a nice happening spot to be. And he doesn't just do this, he also foresees the growth of a community beyond just a service for the road. He builds a general store and other opportunities. He develops this area expecting that this community will grow. And for this, we need to talk about the railroads. You can see this area up here, kind of north of the original Knowlton area. This ends up becoming a lot of the stuff that he develops. I'm going to quote from Louis Marchetti, who said that Leonard Gunther was, at that time, a member of the county board of supervisors, and seeing that a railroad would be of immense benefit to the whole county, although it would, in the first instance, hurt his hotel business, nevertheless, he subordinated his own personal advantage to the advantage of the whole population, and gave his aid and influence to secure the building of a railroad. This is kind of an interesting take. He then goes on to say that he invested in some real estate in Wausau, intending to open a hotel at this place, Wausau, but died before his plans materialized in Knowlton in May of 1876. And he doesn't elaborate here, which is kind of typical for Louis Marchetti. But almost a century later, I don't know why I put this here. Hold on. was doing some last minute changes here. Let me just get rid of this. There we go. About a century later, after Marchetti writes, Deb Nellis put together a timeline of Knowlton, a history of the Knowlton, and she's a little bit less blasé about this, more direct. I mean, he committed suicide on May 1st. His store lost a lot of the wealth that he invested, hoping that the railroad would come here, but it didn't come directly here, and that was unfortunate. It was kind of ruinous to him. And I apologize if that's kind of an abruptness into a dark topic there. But the reality is that these two accounts have kind of different takes. Did he recognize? I mean, why would he invest in all of this stuff if he thought that it would not work out here? They're both right, and they both actually speak to what's actually happening. And so I want to talk about this for a second. So this is the first railroad that comes to Wausau. I'm gonna hide that for a second. So in the 1870s, the turn into the 1870s, Marathon County gets approached by the Wisconsin Central Line, this new railroad venture that's going to come up here. And they say, hey, we want to come to Wausau, right? Due to some legislative stuff back in the 1860s, they had to come to Marathon County. So they said, hey, we want to come to the biggest place. We're going to Stevens Point. We want to come up to Wausau. And Leonard Gunther is a big proponent of this. That would be amazing, because I think he recognizes that the railroad is going to come here whether we want it to or not. It's going to be a thing, right? Whether it's 5 years or 10 years or 5 months, the railroad is going to come to this area, and he's enjoyed the road being the main thoroughfare, but eventually times are going to change, and so he kind of says, well, if it's going to change, let's do it on the terms that are going to benefit my community, Knowlton. And so he advocates to make this happen, but unfortunately, the rest of the county, much of the rest of the county, at least some of it, disagreed. And so we had a contract. Marathon County had a contract with the Wisconsin Central Line. We would be paying. Part of the way that this works is a local community like Marathon County would put up money to help offset the cost of building the railway. Railways are pretty tenuous ventures at this point in time. It's a lot of upfront costs. You have to build the railway and have it finished and usable before you could get any revenue from it. So railway companies very frequently went under. And so, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of money. But some of the people in Marathon County didn't think that that was a great idea because it's a lot of money. And so they basically stopped the ability for Marathon County to raise money to fulfill the contract. And eventually that gets voided and we have to go elsewhere. But the result is this. I mean, this is that line you can see in yellow. And it does come to Marathon County very briefly here on the southwest corner through Spencer area there. But as you can see, it hits Stevens Point, but it does not come up to Wausau. Now, to be fair, the following year in 1874, another railway, and this one we are better terms with, and so Marathon County does get a railway, and it comes up. And as you can see, it does come through Knowlton, right? But a couple things are important to keep in mind here. This is the shoot. I should know this off the top of my the Wisconsin Valley line at the time. But a couple things that are important to keep in mind here. It doesn't go through Stevens Point. Instead, it comes down from, you can't quite see it here, but Wisconsin Rapids, and then it comes up here. So it actually connects in Portage County and Junction City, and then it comes up. And the reason that that's important is you can see with the Wisconsin River, they're coming on the west side of the river. And so instead of following that road that had been going up the east side for years that Knowlton, emerged on, they're going the west side. And so the result is, this is a map from 1882, shortly after this. And I should say in the 1880, there was another railway, but doesn't pass through this area. So you have the road here in yellow that goes through, and then you have the railway. So the railway comes through, but this is like a mile away from the city center. And even this area up here, Leonard Gunther's estate, that's a bit further away. That's not where the depot is. The depot is over here now. And this is a bit of an issue. I mean, it's not the end of the world. It still has a depot, but this is not going to be the center of traffic. Like Leonard Gunther had established all of this stuff getting ready for the railroad to come here, and then it comes a mile west, and yeah, maybe there's more going on here. I don't want to speak and make trivial of what happened to Leonard, but certainly after his death, his family continues, his sons and nephews, and they continue in this area for to develop the area and to run it. And this is unfortunate. The migration of Knowlton happens. You can see, so here are the islands. Keep in mind here, Knowlton is just to the east on the banks near the islands. But if we jump to 1923, you can see that the shaded areas here and the two Knowltons, because there's the depot and then there's also the community of Knowlton, which is interesting that they put both here in the same there. But the shaded area that represents where the community is moving north. The church, the old house, I should say that the house continues to be used, the Knowlton House, for many years as a meeting place, as a hall. It burns down in the 40s. I think it burns down. It's gone by the 40s, by the end of the 40s. But it continues to be kind of an important place. But, as we move forward, the community moves. Because the railway is important. I mean, the roads are great, but the railway in the late 1800s, early 1900s are where it's at. Now, granted, this is all a unfortunate lack of potential that comes to be, but that doesn't mean that this isn't a community that can emerge. And in many ways, this is kind of where a number of other communities might even start. When we talked about Halder and Ponatuskee and Bevent, in the late 1800s, you have new immigrants that come in and they kind of solidify around this area as the farmers. And that's what happens to Knowlton. Even without the railroad connection being as great as they thought it might be, it ends up becoming, not the worst. You have, like I said, Kathleen and May, her mother, because of them, we know about the robust social life that's happening in the community in the 1900s and teens and 20s. And you have a wider community. I mean, like I talked about the Stark brothers, the sawmills continue to run into the 20s, maybe the 30s in places. And then, of course, you have the emergence of agriculture, which is one of the other big things. I mean, today, if chances are, if you think about, Knowlton, you probably think about Mullins because, yeah, there's that creamery. And, the cheese factories that back in the turn of the century were popping up everywhere because that's how the dairy industry had to work. Well, a lot of those disappear, but Mullins continues to be one of the, strong family-owned businesses in that region. And has largely dominated the area. So it's not like, Knowlton disappears because the railroad goes a mile west. It's still very much there. And it continues. So again, 1930, you see the migration has been even further. Now it's over actually in near the depot. And we don't really see much happening down here. But I also wanted to throw this in here because, the railroad is still there, right? But by 1930, you have the emergence of automobiles. And automobiles are going to create another challenge. And this combined with the rise of farming. And because Knowlton becomes a center, with the cheese factory, with they had a canning plant and other sort of agricultural focused things, it becomes a community for the wider farmers. And the road network in yellow here that connects everyone, the roads once again become extremely relevant because that's how you get, you truck in the cans of milk that are going to make it into cheese and cream and butter and all the stuff that we need at the creamery. So things kind of move in a different direction. And of course, one of the other big things that happens, this is, 1945, some really big things happen, but one of them is the construction of Highway 51. That's huge, an interstate highway system that connects, it's a paved road that, goes through the whole area. And Knowlton is just right there. And even after the expansion, also worth noting that when they expand it to a 4-laner, they move it kind of to the east, so you can see kind of how it's moved a little bit. Oh, getting myself there. But yeah, Knowlton is still right there. And then you have, the old is it DB, I think, the county highway, or County Road is still there. You got Highway 34. So, again, these international or interstate and statewide arteries of transportation are still relevant to this community. And then there's the other one. Lake Dubay is the other reason. I think one of the reasons that migration of the center of Knowlton, that unincorporated community there, is in some ways because of the coming of the dam. They had been planning in the 30s to, and ultimately do in the 1940s, to dam the Wisconsin River. It was called the Knowlton Dam, even though it's quite a bit south here. It's actually in Portage County. I guess maybe not everybody calls it that, but it's Lake Dubay. This creates Lake Dubay. Let's see here. So if we have Knowlton, the dam down here floods this entire area and creates, this looks very different than the maps that we've been looking at, right? Although if we look at like the GIS maps, you can still see you can see one of the Twin Islands there amongst all of this. As you can tell, if this is the Twin Island, there's no house there anymore. The Knowlton house had to move. The post office moved to be closer to the depot. It is part of that continuing experience. So Lake Dubay has also changed, obviously, that community as well. I know I'm rushing through the 20th century here. I apologize. I guess I got carried away talking about roads and railroads. But I want to end just with the Knowlton house again, and from the account, because I think it is kind of interesting. It's hard to fathom a period in which a house like this could be the maker, the thing that makes a community, just having a spot, a couple beds, and a place to change the horses. But it certainly was. So I'm gonna go back and read how May Perkins Gunther closes her discussion here by saying that of the Knowlton house and the community of Knowlton as a general, I guess. Quote, wealth, social standing, and pleasures, each in their turn, have been found at this once grand old home. All who have known this house by the historic river Wisconsin will ever hold its memory among their rarest and brightest, remembering that those days were fraught with as deep a worth of courted sunshine and brightness as those of today. The russet tinges cover now that old-time home, where we were welcome day or night, 'twas just the same. If by stage or raft or lumber on river foam, we know this place of rest, and too its untold fame. So there you go. It seems like an appropriate sort of poetic way. I don't know, feeling arty, I guess, today. So thought I would end with that. That's Knowlton. Obviously not all of Knowlton. It's a story of Knowlton, but maybe one that you've never heard before, or maybe you'll hopefully learn something. Yeah. I'm gonna just check to see if there were any comments or questions or anything that might have been left, but we are going to. And if you're catching this in time, of course, feel free to leave a comment, but. Yeah, I think I want to end just by saying, this concludes our discussion about unincorporated communities in Marathon County. But next week, and actually here we do. So this is this past month for July. We're going to kind of keep on the theme, and we're going to instead next week we're going to jump into a new month of themes on villages. So I kind of continued this idea of using an old postcard and sort of that thing, but yeah, we're going to look at some of the villages. We're going to be talking about Elderon, Fenwood, Hatley, and Spencer. So 4 of the notable villages that were incorporated as a community, but have a longer history as well. Yeah, keep the road trip going before the snow gets here, even though it's virtual. Sure, that tracks. Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for watching. I always appreciate everybody that wants to come and see some history, and yeah, hopefully come back next week or next month here with some more stuff. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.